Our guest today is Josh Hammer, host of The Josh Hammer Show and a leading conservative voice on Israel, Iran, and the future of the West. Josh has been right at the center of the post-October 7th debate, especially on the right, where questions about America first, foreign policy, and moral clarity have collided in uncomfortable ways. Josh, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate you having me.
What did October 7th change for you in how you understand the world? Why do you think so many people still struggle to acknowledge what actually happened that day?
Well, look, there's a lot of ways to take that question. I mean, it's not that I needed another reminder, Daniel, that evil exists. I mean, I am someone that's very much had his kind of incipient early formation political worldview shaped heavily by 9/11. So I was 12 years old living in suburban New York when 9/11 happened. And I actually was literally living 25 miles up the river. So I could actually see the smoke from the Twin Towers on that very day. And that was kind of my visceral lesson that evil exists in this world. It was kind of my very first step actually towards becoming a political conservative. So I didn't need another reminder like October 7th to be reminded that evil exists. I also, like most religious people, don't struggle a ton with the question of theodicy, namely why bad things happen to good people. As Jews, we have our answers to these questions. So it wasn't necessarily a huge revelation on either of those fronts to me. But what October 7th really did to me was more the aftermath of October 7th. Obviously, the day itself, unspeakable stuff. I mean, frankly, some of what happened on that day, we just had International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th. And frankly, some of the things that happened on October 7th, I think would have made the Nazis actually blanch. In the forests of Eastern Europe. I mean, it's a quite ghoulish thing to say, but it probably is true. I mean, unspeakable stuff. But to me, the even bigger revelation was not October 7th itself, but the reaction to October 7th. And that really ultimately, Daniel, is what galvanized me to write my book, Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and the Destiny of the West, which came out last March 2025. I started writing that, or at least I had the idea for it, maybe 3 to 4 weeks after October 7th, because by then it was very clear how the Western world was going to react. By then it was very clear how the Biden administration was going to react. It was very clear how the United Nations was going to react, how Brussels, the Eurocrats in Europe were going to react. And they were not reacting very, very warmly. You see, there was a moment of time they could have had this very clear, stark, unambiguous moral dichotomy between the free, flourishing people of Israel, the children of Israel, the birthplace of the Bible, and therefore of Western civilization. They had that on the one hand, and they had this 7th century aspiring Shia supremacist Islamist death cult on the other hand. And the world could have easily said, I choose the former, not the latter. That's not what happened. And the fact that there was so much incredible confusion, the fact that there were 30 plus Harvard University student chapters that before the blood was even dry in southern Israel, there in the Gaza envelope, before the blood was even dry, they were blaming the Jews of Israel for their own wanton slaughter. That to me was my biggest revelation, was that there is just such profound rot, even more than I realized within the West itself.
Do you think the confusion about Israel really is about Israel, or is it about something deeper in Western culture?
It's mostly the latter. Look, the Jews are here, there, and everywhere a proxy. Okay, I mean, is there a single instance of Jew hatred in the history of Jew hatred that is actually about the Jews? Really, I mean, I'm actually not sure if there is. I mean, here in our weekly Torah readings, we're still towards the beginning of the book of Exodus, and in the very first parsha in Exodus, Parsha Shmot, we see Pharaoh, who in some instances is kind of the first anti-Semitic demagogue in the history of demagogues, who starts to rile up the people's passions because it seems that the children of Israel are flourishing in Goshen, this region there, whereas the rest of Egypt was not doing well. And he was basically looking for a scapegoat. He was essentially looking for a scapegoat to try to get the people's attention focused elsewhere, as opposed to focusing then on his own failed leadership. And this proves to be quite prescient, because there's thousands and thousands of years of this exact same thing happening there, whether it's across Europe, whether it's across the Middle East, Northern Africa, for centuries and centuries, for thousands and thousands of years. And, many of the most foremost anti-Semites have been pretty explicit, actually, that it's actually really not about the Jews for them. So in my book, I talk a little bit about Karl Marx. So Karl Marx infamously was the son of an Orthodox rabbi. He himself was, I believe, under Jewish law, he was halakhically Jewish, I think. I can't remember if his mother was or not, but I believe he was. In any event, he abhorred the Jewish people with a passion. He has this infamously anti-Semitic treatise called On the Jewish Question. He says that money is the jealous god of Israel. He had all these profoundly, deeply, deeply, viciously anti-Semitic things. But for Marx, was the Jewish people, was the undermining, if not the annihilation of the Jewish people, actually the goal? No, the goal for Marx was nothing less than to overthrow the entire Western order, to overthrow all of Western capitalism, all of Western Christendom. You see, for Marx, the Jewish people were just a stepping stone, a convenient way to get towards a broader civilizational assault, because he understood quite diabolically that if your actual goal is all of biblical, then you start with the original recipients of God's word, the actual descendants of those who were standing there at the foot of Mount Sinai, the actual children of Israel. And only then after that can you actually get to what a 20th century Pope once referred to as the great Gentile offshoot, that being Christendom itself. You see, the Jews received objective morality, and the Christianity spreads it throughout the West. To me, it's just very obvious that if you want to get rid of the entire biblical inheritance, which I argue in my book really is Western civilization. I mean, when we talk about the West, we really ultimately mean the Bible. Sure, there was a room for the Greeks and the Romans and various other traditions there, but ultimately at its core, it is the Bible really that today is the bedrock of Western civilization. There's a reason that we have all these 10 Commandments court cases when it comes to the 10 Commandments being played there. That really is the basis of who we are there. And if your goal is to overthrow all that, then it makes logical sense really to start with the Jewish people. Similarly, on a geopolitical stage, it makes a lot of sense that if your goal is to be that of a globalist, let's say that you are a George Soros Open Society Foundation person, let's say that you are the United Nations, or Turtle Bay, or this or that. If your actual goal, per John Lennon's horrific dystopian song Imagine, if your actual goal is the eradication of the nation state, is the eradication of all the various things that make us human in the first place, our religion, our tribal identities, etc. If you want to get rid of all of that, and you actually really want this global order, this notion that human beings are as interchangeable as widgets on an economics 101 class board, if that's really what you want, if that is really what you want, then it makes a lot of sense to go after Israel as well. Because the state of Israel and the children of Israel are these hyper particularist exceptions to universalism. This, too, is one of the traditional reasons for anti-Semitism, is that the Jews are infamously, in the Torah, described as this stiff-necked people. These people that refuse throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia, to be subsumed, to be homogenized into the universalist masses. And so, too, the nation of Israel today, the state of Israel, is a very particularist nationalist state. In fact, there's actually biblical antecedent for that, too. Going back to the Bible, really, we can kind of see the ancient antecedent of the modern nation-state system back then. When King David unites the tribes in Jerusalem, it's really the first instance of someone uniting tribes into a concrete nation with defined borders. Those borders, in that case, were actually defined by God himself. So if your goal is to abolish biblical morality, you start with the Jews. And if your goal is to abolish the nation-state system, then you start with the state of Israel. It makes a certain diabolical sense, but these provocateurs fundamentally do know what they're doing.
What does America First actually mean, and what does it not mean, and why has Israel become the stress test for this America First movement?
Okay, so America First is a somewhat anodyne phrase, right? I mean, who in America is not America First? It's a label that is almost silly insofar as it doesn't really say a whole lot. It's something of a truism. I mean, anyone who lives in a country is going to be that particular country first. Now, there are some people that take America First to mean, as Dennis Prager's argued, to mean America only. That is the only thing they care about is the very narrow kind of four corners of the country there, that literally anything beyond the borders, they just want to close their ears and kind of like the ostrich, bury their head in the sand and just not have anything to do with the rest of the world. That is definitely one possible interpretation of America First. But the more natural way to understand America First, what I've argued, I think how President Trump himself understands the term, as the guy who literally brought it back from the grave, as the guy who resuscitated this term and re-injected it into our body politic, I think how he understands it and how I understand it is that America First means that we are always going to prioritize our nation first, but America also is a global superpower, by definition has interests all throughout the world, and as a superpower, we are going to be also reliant on certain allies, because there is such thing as an ally, contrary to the Tucker Carlson crowd. There is such thing as an ally. And because we prioritize our interests first, yes, we have limited resources. Yes, we're not going to be the world's policemen, a la George W. Bush, Don Rumsfeld, all that. That was a failure. But we have interests, and we're going to have to rely to an extent on our allies to secure our own interests in a certain part of the world where we can only dole out and provide certain limited resources. I met with a U.S. senator back in September. I won't say his name. It was a very private, off-record meeting, but he had read my book. He liked the book very much, invited me to sit down and chat with him. And I said, Senator, here's a very useful definition of an ally. In fact, you should probably take this and try to talk to your Senate colleagues there, see how far this goes when it comes to Israel or really any other country. An ally is a country who, when that country acts in its own national interest, the United States benefits directly as a secondary or tertiary effect. If that's the case, that's an ally. And Donald Trump understands that to be America first, you have to rely on allies, countries that fit that definition in certain parts of the world. And he's understood since day one that Israel is a key force for advancing America's interests in the Middle East. And even more so, the entire first term and to an extent second term Trump foreign policy on Israel, namely this bolstering of this relationship there, going all in for this relationship there, it's actually all part of, if you zoom out, it's actually all part of this very slow, methodical, but nonetheless inevitable pivot to the Indo-Pacific to focus on China. If you view China as America's number one geopolitical civilizational threat, which it is, I view China as the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth biggest threats to the U.S. I mean, it's not even close. Then it stands to reason that you're going to have to better patrol and secure other regions of the world as well, based on your allies in the region there. So it's actually part of this let's try to limit America's presence in the Middle East strategy there, which is kind of another part of how it actually is America first to support this particular bilateral alliance. But, maybe the most clearest and obvious way that I can articulate why this particular bilateral alliance between the U.S. and Israel is America first is the following. Look, we can kind of talk about how all the various forms of technology that benefit Americans today come from Israel, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's the Waze navigation app. I mean, a shockingly high percentage of tech companies on the NASDAQ stock exchange are based in Israel, okay? That would be easy to do. But the most clearest, most obvious way, and this way I tell a lot of college students when I talk on campus, is this. You can look at the 2024 killing spree that Israel started to do against Hezbollah. So this is kind of the Michael Corleone Godfather X killing spree that Israel starts to go on, ultimately culminating in the Beeper operation, in the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, cowardly hiding in his bunker in Beirut, and then the killing of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas mastermind in Gaza as well. So on the way towards killing Nasrallah in Lebanon, they knocked off a lot, essentially all of the Hezbollah organizational hierarchy. And two of the jihadists who Israel killed at that time were men by the name of Ibrahim Akil and Fuad Shakur. Who are Ibrahim Akil and Fuad Shakur? Well, they are the masterminds, respectively, of the 1983 U.S. embassy bombing in Beirut from Hezbollah and the U.S. Marine barracks slaughter in Beirut, Lebanon. Okay, those two bombings killed, respectively, roughly 60 to 70 people at the embassy, and then 241 Marines. And those two guys were the masterminds. For 4+ decades, the U.S. State Department had bounties, literal bounties on their head of $5 and $7 million, respectively, for Shakur and Akil. Nothing happened until the IDF took them out in 2024. So people say, how is it America first there? Well, there you go. Because you literally get your dirty jihadist work for you in the form of multi-million-dollar State Department bounties there. Again, there's any number of ways to answer this question there, but to get back to our basic definition of what is an ally is a country that when they act in their own national interest, your national interest is advanced as a secondary or tertiary effect. I literally cannot think of a clear example in this.
I want to get your thoughts about what's happening in Iran right now and why it is that people came out in mass to protest for the Free Palestine movement, but we hear silence for the masses of people that were murdered in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty clear to me, Daniel, that this is just anti-Semitism. I mean, there's no other explanation to that. Literally, I mean, there's the popular saying, "No Jews, no news." I mean, that's exactly what's happening here. Okay, it pretty much is that simple. I mean, again, this is the reason that you had these Harvard student groups, over 30 of them, that within hours of October 7th were clamoring and saying that the Jews were responsible for their own slaughter. The facts, the logic, the reason, none of that has anything to do with it. It has only to do with the fact that there are Jews who can be blamed. This gets back to this whole neo-Marxist mentality of intersectionality and the oppressor-oppressed moral and sociological dichotomy. It's outrageous. But when there are Muslims killing fellow Muslims, they do not care. They just don't care. There was no one out there when Bashar al-Assad was gassing to death 500,000 of his own people. There was no one out there during Saddam Hussein's various crimes back in the 80s and back in the 1990s. There was no one there during the Yemeni civil war that really is still going on to this day. And on we go. I mean, how about the Boko Haram atrocities in Nigeria? I mean, there's a few people there who are speaking out because there are Christians getting slaughtered. But really, above all, it's when Jews are involved that seems to just stir people's passions. And there's really no other way to understand this other than the fact that this is just the world's most ancient and intractable form of bigotry. That's really all it is. Again, if you have greater goals in mind, not greater, but larger goals in mind, namely the obstruction, the destruction of Western civilization via the biblical code, namely the abolition of the nation state via universals run amok. If these are your goals, it makes a lot of sense, in a diabolical sense, but it still makes a lot of sense to start with the Jews. And therefore, these people like to pick on the Jews.
Now, you have Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, people with enormous influence. How much of a responsibility do they have on shaping the opinions of, the masses? And why is it that they've changed so much over the recent years, in your opinion?
Yeah, so my basic take on this, Daniel, is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to this. It depends on the person. So, look, I mean, Candace Owens, I'll give you my take on her. Candace Owens is someone who seemed to me to be going down the rabbit hole around the time that she was befriending Kanye West back in 2022. I was actually very early on the Candace train, not to pat myself too hard. I was calling her out in September, October 2022 when she was defending Kanye, when Kanye was going full Nazi at the time, calling for DEFCON 3 on Jewish people, et cetera. And it seemed to me as early as then, and definitely now, as Candace continues to say things like the synagogue of Satan, this is really Louis Farrakhan Nation of Islam rhetoric. So my working theory on Candace in particular is that I bet Kanye West, I've long thought Kanye West probably introduced her to Nation of Islam pamphlets or literature or something like that. That's been my working theory for those two for a while. I think for a lot of folks, it's as simple as the clicks, frankly. I really do. So you have someone like a Matt Gaetz, let's call it. Matt Gaetz had me on last March for a very flattering segment, a long 15-minute segment on his One America News show on my book. He called my book a battle map to save Western civilization. Really, that was last March. By June, so literally 3 months later, in the build-up to the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, Gaetz was tweeting about Jewish supremacy and all this other anti-Semitic bile. So what happened? I mean, he didn't change his mind in 3 months, certainly. I mean, I think it was literally as clearly as trying to just play these social media algorithms. And indeed, there was a study that came out about a month and a half, almost 2 months ago now, from a group called NCRI, the New Contagion Research Institute, this social science organization based in New Jersey. And they showed, or I think they persuasively showed, that many of Nick Fuentes' followers actually come from overseas, whether they're Pakistani bot farms, whether they're from Qatar, Nigeria, whatever the case may be there. So there's definitely an element of cliques of foreign actors being involved here. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. Some folks probably are actually being paid. I have long suspected that Tucker Carlson is taking Russian and/or Qatari money. His propaganda videos for Putin's regime in Russia were outrageous 2 years ago in February 2024. These videos from the Moscow subway station, from the supermarket there, really the kind of stuff I think would have made Bernie Sanders circa 1983 cringe. That's how utterly propagandistic these videos were. Now he's interviewing the Emir of Qatar twice. He's talking about getting a house in Qatar. Meanwhile, there's this LLC in Northern Virginia called Illuminated Advisors that registered as FARA agents for the state of Qatar, and they listed the principal place where they were trying to get the Emir of Qatar interview as the Tucker Carlson show. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence to support that Tucker is probably taking Qatari money, possibly also, again, as I said, Russian money. There's no smoking gun there, but there's a lot of smoke. I guess we'll put it that way. So it just depends. It really just depends. Tucker also maybe has, frankly, been anti-Semite for a long time. I did not necessarily see that coming, but in hindsight, a lot of his editorial choices at Fox News, I think, make a lot more sense after his rather peculiar turn the past couple of years. So, for instance, back when he was on Fox News, he was still anti-Sharia law. He was not exactly anti-Israel. He wasn't super pro, but he wasn't anti at least. But at the time, he gave Jackson Hinkle his first platform. Jackson Hinkle is this little lunatic with millions of followers there who tweets about taking up arms on behalf of Iran and Hezbollah. Hinkle got his first cable news platform, I think, on the Tucker Carlson show back on Fox News. Tucker brought on Max Blumenthal, a loathsome Russian propagandist, self-hating Jewish scumbag. So, I mean, Tucker made a lot of choices that in hindsight seem rather strange. And, maybe he's had some long-standing animus as well. I think he probably has, frankly. But there's probably also some kind of foreign funding element going on there, too. So It just depends. Definitely October 7th was really kind of the first opening of the floodgates for a lot of this garbage sentiment, really kind of get out there. The assassination of my friend Charlie Kirk really was the next step in kind of all this just exploding to the next level. It's sad, but fundamentally, Daniel, I think the American people are not where the propagandists and the demagogues want them to be. They're still, broadly speaking, for the most part, on team sanity, and we just have to keep on charging full steam ahead, frankly.
Do you think that there are parts of the right that are absorbing left-wing narratives without realizing it, or, as you're saying, it's a tiny percentage of the right?
Yeah, look, it just depends on the poll. Okay, so Turning Point USA had a poll at their conference in December, just over a month ago there, that showed that something like 87% of the conference attendees showed that right there, or said that Israel is an ally, either one of many allies or America's best ally. That's a very high percentage. Their poll from their Student Action Summit conference last July in Tampa, similarly showed that 73% of all conference attendees identified as pro-Israel. That's also pretty high. There's other polls that show that young people do have very mixed opinions when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Sometimes you see some polls, even out of reputable polling outfits like Harvard Harris, sometimes show that Hamas, a terrorist organization, has an uncomfortably high degree of support among certain pockets of Gen Zs. It really does just depend on the polls to an extent there. Uh, Look, definitely Gen Z seems to have a higher tolerance for conspiracism, I guess, than a lot of previous generations. And there's this big study recently from the Manhattan Institute that kind of took the political viewpoints of older Republicans, younger Republicans. A lot of younger Republicans do tend towards the more conspiratorial. And we know that historically speaking, there's really one place where most conspiracy theories end, and that ultimately is with the Jewish people. And indeed, the pollsters do consistently show that there is a very high correlation between willingness to accept conspiracy theories and animus towards the Jewish people.
What are your thoughts on the future of Gaza? Do you think that Palestinians could actually be de-radicalized? Do you think that Hamas could actually be removed? Trump's Gaza peace plan? What do you think?
I mean, I'm profoundly skeptical. I would love that skepticism to be proven wrong. I mean, the fundamental problem with Gaza is the people of Gaza. I mean, this is an insanely radicalized population that supports suicide bombings, lethal, deadly jihad. I mean, they are a rather rambunctious bunch. I think this would be a very polite way of saying it there. They have very high levels of support in the polling for Al Qaeda and ISIS and Hamas and just the worst actors when it comes to Sharia supremacism and fundamental Islamism. And I don't really know what you do with that exactly there. So, I mean, do I wish that Gaza looks like the Singapore in the Mediterranean that was promised back in 2005 when Israel withdrew under Ariel Sharon? Yeah, of course. I mean, who doesn't want to see this beautiful piece of property on the Mediterranean, flourish? I mean, who doesn't want that? I mean, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, have been talking about redeveloping Gaza. I mean, who does not want to see the Four Seasons in Khan Yunis or the Ritz-Carlton in Gaza City there? But are you going to have will there be a Four Seasons and then underneath, below the basement, is like a Hamas terror tunnel? Are there going to be like rockets hidden beneath the Ritz-Carlton? I mean, how does that work exactly there? So there's a massive, massive task ahead in terms of not just gutting the now 2-decade-long militarization of this tiny plot of land, but also how do you de-Nazify this population of 1.5 million, nearly 2 million people, maybe even more than that, it's hard to say, who just have the most barbaric beliefs about Jews, Christians, and all other quote-unquote infidels, by which they really just mean also non-Sharia supremacist Muslims. I don't have the good answers to that. I really have no answer to that, actually. I don't know exactly how you're supposed to fix that. I'm not sure there's any way to fix that particularly easily there. I wish them the best of luck, but for now, I find myself pretty skeptical, honestly.
We know that Donald Trump is the best president towards Israel, but at the same time, he's close to Qatar, close to Turkey. He seems to be close to those who are not exactly friends with Israel. What are your thoughts on?
Look, I've been critical of the administration's coziness with Qatar. Qatar in particular is a profoundly bad actor. They buy off Westerners. They pretend like they're on the right side of this because they have Al Udeid Air Base there, and they famously sometimes put on this whole show of allowing the United States to air to do high-profile operations from Al-Udeid Air Base, such as the strike against Qasem Soleimani in 2020. They're bad actors. I mean, they are the ideological home of the Muslim Brotherhood and, by extension, all of Sunni Islamism. They are the number one bankrollers of Hamas and the Brotherhood. They are on the wrong side of the civilization versus barbarism divide. And I would prefer that our transactions with them be few and sparse and deeply, deeply, purely transactional at that. I'm not a big fan of the fawning praise of some of these leaders. These other countries as well. I mean, Saudi Arabia, look, I mean, the Saudis for a long time were a bulwark of the moderate faction of the Arab world. They banned the Brotherhood, declared it a terrorist organization. Mohammed bin Salman did a lot to clean up the Wahhabism and the Islamist mosques and clerics. That's changing. Just over the past literally month and a half, a very, very recent thing. Saudi Arabia is kind of joining the dark side, unfortunately. They're going back whence they came. Al Arabiya, state-sponsored Saudi TV, is now sounding a lot like Al Jazeera, Qatari TV. In fact, at times, based on what I've read, and Al Arabiya Arabic is sounding actually even worse. Now, Al Arabiya has English channel as well. I've actually been on there numerous times, so that's different. But in the original language, in Arabic there, it's getting quite radical. They're talking about the UAE as a Zionist Trojan horse, and they're blaming kind of the whole Middle East as a big Zionist plot. I mean, it was not that long ago they were talking about possible normalization with Saudi Arabia when it comes to the Abraham Accords. Now it seems like it's very far away, to be honest with you. So that's really quite a shame. So look, I would prefer that Qatar really be minimized. I would prefer that when it comes to Saudi Arabia, that the United States really use more leverage. We have a lot of leverage with Saudi Arabia as a country that essentially relies almost exclusively on America for their military weaponry, their aircraft, their small arms, this and that there. We have a ton of leverage with Saudi Arabia, frankly, and really we ought to use that leverage.
I want to thank you for your time. If you want to let people know where they can find you, find your book.
First, yeah, so I appreciate it, Daniel. So the Josh Hammer Show is a daily podcast. Everywhere you get your podcast, it's also on video at the YouTube page for Newsweek, where I'm senior editor at large. It's also available via the Salem News channels. You can go to salemnewschannel.com or watch it every evening at 10 p.m. on the Salem News channel. I write a weekly syndicated column. It goes up at Newsweek, Real Clear Politics, Daily Signal, Town Hall, many other locations as well. I'm also senior counsel for the Article 3 Project. Check us out at Article 3 Project. And then also my book, Israel and Civilization, The Fate of the Jewish Nation and Destiny of the West, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere you get your books.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Daniel.